stared at the smoking crater where his farmhouse used to stand. The acrid smell of plasma burns mixed with something worse, the charred remains of everything he'd ever loved. His hands shook as he pulled the twisted metal that had once been his son's bicycle from the rubble. "Tommy," he whispered, his voice cracking like dry wood. The boy had been only 8 years old. 8 years of morning pancakes, bedtime stories, and dreams of becoming a space pilot just like his dad had been, back before the war ended and left growing corn instead of fighting aliens. The patrol ship's engines still hummed overhead, a low thrumming that made his teeth ache. They hadn't even bothered to land, just swept down from the sky, fired their plasma cannons at his home, and kept flying. To them, it was probably just target practice. Had been in the South Field when it happened, checking the irrigation systems his grandfather had installed 50 years ago. He'd heard the engines first, that distinctive whine that every human recognized now. Then came the flash of green light and the sound that would haunt him forever, the sound of his world ending. The Galactic Council called it maintaining order in the outer sectors. They called it resource management. Called it what it was, murder. He knelt in the ashes and picked up a small piece of melted plastic. Tommy's action figure, Captain Starlight, Defender of Earth. The irony wasn't lost on him. There were no defenders left. The war had ended 3 years ago with humanity's conditional surrender. Earth got to keep existing, but only if they stayed quiet, paid their taxes to the galactic treasury, and didn't cause trouble. Apparently, growing food on land the wanted for mining counted as causing trouble. Stood slowly, his knees popping like gunshots in the silence. At 42, he felt ancient. The war had taken his youth, his wife had taken herself, and now the peace had taken his son. He had nothing left except the scars on his back from torture chambers and a knowledge of 17 different ways to kill someone with his bare hands. The nearest neighbor was 12 miles away through the forest. Started walking, carrying nothing but the melted toy and a rage that burned hotter than the plasma cannons. Mrs. Henderson would have seen the flash. She'd call the authorities, and they'd send someone to investigate in a few days, maybe a week. The Galactic Council wasn't big on rapid response when humans were involved. The forest felt different as he walked, quieter. Even the birds had stopped singing. Had spent 2 decades in these woods as a kid, learning every trail and stream from his father. The old man had been a Vietnam veteran, full of stories about jungles and an enemy you couldn't see, had thought those days were behind them. He should have known better. The path to Henderson's farm wound through a valley where ancient oaks grew thick enough to block out the sun. Had walked this route hundreds of times, usually with Tommy chattering beside him about school or friends or the latest hologram shows from New Angels. The silence felt like another kind of death. That's when he heard the ship engines again. Dropped to his belly and crawled behind a fallen log, his military training kicking in like muscle memory. The engines were different this time, not the smooth hum of patrol craft, but something rougher, more primitive, human-built from the sound of it. Through the gaps in the branches, he saw it coming in low and fast. A modified cargo hauler, the kind smugglers and black market traders used to run the blockades. It was painted flat black with no identification markers, and it was heading straight for his property. The ship touched down in what used to be his front yard, landing gear extending with mechanical precision. Stayed hidden and waited. After 5 minutes, the cargo bay door opened with a hydraulic hiss. 2 figures emerged, and had to blink twice to make sure he wasn't hallucinating from smoke inhalation. The first was definitely human, tall, lean, moving with the controlled grace of someone who'd spent years in combat zones. He wore civilian clothes but recognized the posture. Military. Special forces from the way he cleared corners and checked sight lines. His dark hair was shot with gray, and he carried himself like a man who'd seen too much and survived it all. The second figure was impossible. It stood nearly 8 feet tall and covered in thick, dark fur. Its face was disturbingly human-like but stretched into something larger, more primitive. Massive hands ended in fingers thick as wrist. It moved like a predator, every step calculated and silent despite its size. A Sasquatch, a goddamn Sasquatch. Rubbed his eyes and looked again, still there. The creature was real, standing next to the human like they were old friends. It wore what looked like modified military gear, tactical vest, utility belt, combat boots that must have been custom-made. The human was scanning the destroyed farmhouse with what looked like military binoculars. He said something to the Sasquatch, who responded with a series of grunts and gestures that somehow seemed like actual communication. Then the human turned toward the forest and called out, "Former Lieutenant Commander, Earth Defense Force. If you're out there, we need to talk." His blood went cold. Nobody should know his name. His military service was classified, buried under layers of bureaucracy and post-war secrecy agreements. He'd been just another grunt as far as the official records showed. "We know about your son," the man continued. "We know what the did, and we know you want to do something about it." The Sasquatch made a low rumbling sound that might have been agreement, or hunger, couldn't tell. "My name is Jake. I used to be a Navy SEAL. We work for people who think the Galactic Council made a mistake when they decided humanity should stay quiet." Felt his heart hammering against his ribs. This was either a trap or a miracle, and he'd learned not to believe in miracles. "They have been pushing harder lately," continued. "Taking land, taking resources, taking lives. The Council looks the other way because the tax money is good, but some of us think it's time to push back." The Sasquatch tilted his massive head and looked directly at the log where was hiding. Their eyes met across 50 yards of forest undergrowth and realized that hiding was pointless. The creature had probably known exactly where he was from the moment he'd entered the woods. Followed his companion's gaze and nodded. "Come on out, Commander. Time's wasting and we've got work to do." Stood slowly, his legs unsteady. He still clutched Tommy's melted toy in his left hand. His right hand moved automatically to where his sidearm should be, but he hadn't carried a weapon in 3 years. The peace treaty forbade it. "Who are you people?" called out as he stepped from the tree line. Smiled, and it was the kind of smile that promised violence to someone. "We're the people who are going to help you get justice for your boy. But first, you need to hear the truth about what's really happening out there in the galaxy, and why humanity is a lot more important than they want anyone to know." The Sasquatch made another rumbling sound and nodded like he understood every word. "Says there's another patrol about 20 minutes out. We should move." Looked back at the ruins of his life, then at the impossible pair standing beside their unmarked ship. Tommy's funeral would have to wait. Some things were more important than grief. Some things required action. "Where are we going?" asked, walking toward the ship. Smile got wider. "To meet some friends of mine. Turns out humanity has been making allies out here in the dark. The kind of allies the Galactic Council pretends don't exist." As they climbed aboard the ship, caught sight of something painted on the inside of the cargo bay door. A symbol he didn't recognize but somehow understood. It showed a human hand gripping the talon of some kind of bird of prey, surrounded by words in a language that looked almost familiar. "What does that mean?" he asked. Glanced at the symbol and started the pre-flight sequence. "It means never alone," he said. "In Sasquatch, turns out when you spend enough time in the deep woods, you learn that Earth has had neighbors all along, and some of those neighbors have been waiting a long time for humanity to grow up enough to be worth knowing." The engine spun up with a satisfying roar and felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. The ship broke through Earth's atmosphere 30 minutes later and got his first look at what the galaxy really looked like beyond the sanitized news feeds. "Holy shit," he breathed. The orbital space around Earth wasn't empty. It was crowded with ships he'd never seen before, sleek vessels that looked like they'd been grown rather than built, massive cargo haulers with hull designs that everything he knew about physics, and smaller craft that moved in formations so complex they looked like schools of fish swimming through the void. "Welcome to the real neighborhood," said, adjusting their course to avoid a cluster of crystalline ships that sparkled like jewels against the star field. "The Galactic Council likes to pretend it's just them and their member species out here, but space is big, really big, and it's full of people who never signed up for their version of order." Was squeezed into the co-pilot's seat, his massive frame barely fitting even with the chair pushed all the way back. He made a series of grunts and gestures and nodded. "He says they have increased their patrol schedules around Earth in the last few weeks. Something has them worried." Stared at the alien. "He really talks to you." "Sasquatch have been living on Earth longer than humans," replied. "They learned to stay hidden when our ancestors started cutting down forests and building cities, but they never stopped watching. When the Galactic Council showed up and started treating Earth like their private property, well, let's just say the original inhabitants weren't too happy about it." A proximity alarm chirped and adjusted their heading toward a massive asteroid that hung in the shadow of Earth's moon. As they got closer, realized it wasn't an asteroid at all. It was a space station built into and around a chunk of rock the size of Manhattan. Docking bays opened like mouths in the stone surface, and dozens of ships moved in and out like busy insects. "Welcome to Haven Station," said, "home base for the Terran Liberation Front." The what had never heard of any Liberation Front. "Officially, we don't exist. The peace treaty forbids any kind of human military organization. But the treaty didn't account for allies who never signed it," guided them into a docking bay that looked like it had been carved from solid rock. "The Sasquatch Nation, what's left of the Cherokee Space Navigation Guild, the deep ocean folks who've been hiding in the trench for the last century. Turns out Earth had a lot of secrets even before the aliens showed up." The docking bay pressurized with a hiss and felt his ears pop. Through the viewports, he could see people moving around outside, humans in work coveralls, but also others that easy description. Tall, willowy beings with too many joints in their arms. Squat, rock-like creatures that seemed to be made of living stone. And more Sasquatch working alongside humans like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Come on," said, powering down the engines. "Time to meet the boss." They walked through corridors that had been cut from living rock, polished smooth and lined with lights that seemed to grow from the walls themselves. The air smelled of recycled atmosphere and something else, something wild and green, like a forest after rain. "How long has this been here?" asked. "Station's been operating for about 18 months, replied. "But the alliance goes back a lot further. Turns out the Sasquatch have been in contact with other non-council species for decades. They've been building a network, waiting for the right time to act." Rumbled something, and his expression grew grim. "He says they aren't just taking land anymore. They're taking people. Humans who know too much, humans who ask too many questions, humans whose kids might grow up to cause trouble." Felt the rage building in his chest again. "Like Tommy." "Like Tommy," confirmed. They entered a large chamber that had been converted into a command center. Holographic displays showed star maps, ship positions, and data streams couldn't interpret. A dozen workstations were occupied by the strangest collection of beings had ever seen. At the center of it all stood a woman in her 50s, silver-haired and tough-looking, wearing clothes that somehow managed to look both civilian and military at the same time. She was talking quietly with something that looked like a walking tree, complete with bark-like skin and leaves for hair. "Admiral," she said as they approached, and nearly stumbled. "I'm not an admiral. I was never promoted past lieutenant commander." The woman smiled. "You are now. Field promotion courtesy of the Terran Liberation Front. I'm Director Sarah, formerly of Earth Defense Intelligence. This is Elder of the Forest Collective." The tree being nodded, its voice like wind through branches. "We are sorry for your loss, Admiral. The taking of children is a crime against all living things." Looked around the command center, trying to process what he was seeing. "This is insane. You're talking about war against the Galactic Council. They have thousands of ships, entire fleets. We surrendered for a reason." "We surrendered because we thought we were alone," replied. "Turns out we were wrong, dead wrong. Show him the data." Led them to a holographic display that showed the local galactic arm. Hundreds of star systems glowed in different colors: blue for council members, red for neutral territories, green for unknown contacts. "The council controls maybe 20% of this sector," explained. "They just act like they control it all. Most species out here are either ignored by the council or actively hiding from them. They're not evil, just bureaucratic. They tax what they can reach and ignore the rest." "The problem is added. "They've been pushing the council to take a harder line on unregistered species, claiming it's for galactic security, but really they want exclusive access to resources. Earth was just the first target." Elder gestured with one branch-like arm, and the display zoomed in on the Sol system. "The forest people have been watching the metal ships," he said. "They are preparing for something larger. The taking of your son was not random violence. It was a test." "A test of what?" demanded. "To see if humanity would fight back," replied. "They have been systematically targeting families with military backgrounds, scientists, anyone who might organize resistance. They want to break our spirit before they make their real move." Made a long series of sounds that translated. "He says the Sasquatch encountered scout teams in the deep forests last month. They were taking biological samples, mapping territorial boundaries, like they're planning some kind of large-scale operation. Felt something cold settle in his stomach. What kind of operation? Touched a control and the display changed to show Earth itself. Red markers appeared across all the continents, hundreds of them. Resettlement, she said quietly. They're planning to relocate most of humanity to designated preservation zones and open up the rest of the planet for colonization. According to our intelligence, the operation is scheduled to begin in 6 weeks. The room fell silent except for the hum of electronics and the distant sound of ships moving through the docking bays. How many people know about this? Asked. On Earth, maybe 1,000 scattered across different cells and resistance groups. Out here, gestured at the display showing the galaxy. Tens of thousands, hundreds of species that have been hiding from the Council, waiting for someone to make the first move. The Sasquatch Nation alone has over 50,000 adult warriors, added. They've been preparing for this fight for 3 years, and they're not the only ones. Elder's leaves rustled in what might have been amusement. The forest people have been preparing for this fight for 300 years, ever since the first metal ships visited our world. We do not surrender. We do not negotiate with those who harm children. Looked around the command center again, seeing it with new eyes. This wasn't just a resistance hideout. It was a military headquarters, planning center for what might be the largest uprising in galactic history. What do you want from me? He asked. Stepped closer and could see the steel in her eyes. We want you to help us remind the galaxy why humanity fought so hard in the First War, why it took them 3 years and a dozen fleets to finally force our surrender. We want you to help us show them that surrender is not the same as defeat. They made a mistake when they killed your son, added. They made it personal, and humans are very, very dangerous when things get personal. Stood to his full height and placed one massive hand on shoulder. The touch was surprisingly gentle. He made a soft, rumbling sound. He says the forest remembers all its children, translated, and the forest never forgets those who take them. Closed his eyes and saw Tommy's face again, bright with excitement, asking questions about the stars and whether they would ever meet real aliens. The boy would never get his answers now. When opened his eyes, the grief was still there, but it had crystallized into something harder and more useful. What's the plan? He asked. Smiled, and it was the kind of smile that would have made a patrol nervous. Phase 1 rescue operations. We extract high-value humans before they can disappear them. Phase 2, intelligence gathering. We map their entire operation and find the weak points. Phase 3. She paused and looked around the room. Phase 3 is where you come in, Admiral. We're going to hit them where it hurts most. Which is their home base in this sector. The facility where they've been holding the humans they've already taken, including some very important people the Galactic Council thought were dead. Felt his pulse quicken. How important? Important enough that their rescue might just convince the rest of humanity that the war isn't over, replied. It just moved to a new theater. The holographic display shifted again, showing a fortress-like structure orbiting a dead star system 3 weeks away from Earth. Even through the static-filled images, could see it was heavily defended. Patrol ships, weapon platforms, energy shields that could probably withstand anything short of a direct nuclear strike. That's suicide, he said. Grinned. That's what they said about the raid on Titan Station during the war. But you pulled that off with just 12 people and a mining ship. Stared at him. How do you know about Titan Station? That mission is still classified. Because 3 of the people they're holding in that facility were on your team, replied quietly. Commander Sarah Park, Lieutenant James Wolfe, and Sergeant Major Maria Santos. They've been listed as killed in action for 3 years, but our intelligence says they're alive. Barely, but alive. The world seemed to tilt around. Sarah Park had been his second in command, a tactical genius who could plan an assault in her head faster than most people could use a computer. Jim Wolfe was the best pilot had ever known, capable of flying anything with engines. And Maria Santos. Maria had saved his life on Titan Station, taking a plasma rifle burst meant for him. They're alive, he whispered. And they're waiting for us to come get them, said. Along with about 200 other humans they have been experimenting on. Scientists, soldiers, engineers, anyone with skills they think might be useful. Looked at the fortress again, studying its defenses with eyes that had learned to see patterns in chaos. It was heavily defended, but defense could be a weakness if you knew how to exploit it. "I'll need a team," he said. "Good people, people I can trust." "Already assembled," replied. "Volunteers from 6 different species, all with personal reasons to hate including 2 more Sasquatch warriors who've been training with human special forces tactics for the last year." Made a pleased rumbling sound and flexed his hands. The gesture was unmistakably threatening. "When do we leave?" asked. "Tomorrow," said. "But tonight, you need to see something else, something that will help you understand just how big this fight really is." She led them to another chamber, this one with viewports that looked out into deep space. And hanging in the darkness beyond the station, barely visible against the stars, were ships. Dozens of them, hundreds. "The first wave of the Liberation Fleet," explained. "Ships from the Sasquatch Nation, the Forest Collective, the Deep Ocean Folks, and 12 other species that never signed up for Council authority. They've been gathering for months, waiting for the signal." Stared at the impossible sight. Ships that looked like they'd been grown from living wood, others that seemed to be made of crystallized light, some that were clearly built using technology he couldn't begin to understand. "My God," he breathed. "Tomorrow you're going to rescue our people," said. "And when you do, when you show the galaxy that humans don't abandon their own, you're going to start something that will make the first war look like a training exercise." "They think humanity is broken," added. "They think we'll just roll over and accept whatever they decide to do to us. Time to show them they're wrong." Thought of Tommy again, of all the dreams that had died with him. But he also thought of Sarah Park, Jim Wolfe, and Maria Santos, waiting in a prison for a rescue that they probably didn't even believe would come. They were wrong about that, too. "Let's go get our people back," said. The rescue ship was nothing like the sleek vessels remembered from his military days. Instead of clean metal and regulation everything, it looked like someone had taken a standard cargo hauler and let a mad scientist loose on it. "She's not much to look at," admitted as they walked through the modified cargo bay. "But she's fast, quiet, and completely invisible to Galactic Council sensors." "How is that possible?" asked, running his hand along a wall that felt warm and somehow alive. "Sasquatch biotechnology," replied a voice from behind them. Turned to see another massive figure approaching, this one even larger than. Where fur was dark brown, this newcomer's coat was silver gray, and intricate tattoos covered his arms in patterns that seemed to shift when wasn't looking directly at them. "Admiral Meet Grizzly," said. "He's our specialist in making things disappear." Grizzly extended one enormous hand and shook it, surprised by the creature's careful control of his strength. "Honored to meet the father of the lost child," Grizzly said in English that was surprisingly clear despite his pronounced canine teeth. "We will bring justice for small Tommy." Felt his throat tighten. Even here, surrounded by impossible allies planning an impossible mission, the grief was still there, sharp as broken glass. "The ship's hull is grown, not built," Grizzly continued, apparently sensing need for distraction. "Living metal engineered by my people over many generations. It absorbs scanner beams instead of reflecting them. To technology, we will appear to be empty space." They moved through the ship and met the rest of the team. A former Earth Defense Force engineer who'd been presumed dead when her research station was destroyed by a meteor strike 2 years ago. Turned out the meteor had been a plasma torpedo and had been rescued by deep ocean dwellers who lived in thermal vents on the ocean floor. "They're basically aquatic humans," explained as she showed the ship's modified weapon systems. "Evolved separately from us but close enough that we can work together. They've been building submarines and underwater cities for centuries. They have no idea they exist." Next was Pine, one of Elder's people, a forest collective warrior whose bark-like skin could change color to match any environment. When Pine activated the camouflage ability, he became virtually invisible even standing right in front of. "My people call it bark walking," Pine explained in a voice like rustling leaves. "We have been using it to avoid the metal ships since they first came to Earth. Now we use it to kill them." The weapons specialist was the biggest surprise, a being called Flint who looked like someone had taken a pile of rocks and taught them to walk. His species came from a high-gravity world where the mountains themselves were alive, and he could manipulate stone and metal with his bare hands. "Flint builds things that go boom," explained helpfully. "Very big booms." "The facility is constructed from standard council materials," Flint rumbled in a voice like grinding boulders. "I know their molecular structure. I can make their walls forget they are supposed to be solid." But the strangest member of the team was also the most important, a creature called Echo who belonged to a species that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Echo looked like a tall, thin human made of shifting shadows, and when he spoke, his voice seemed to come from 6 different directions at once. "I can walk through their security systems," Echo explained, his form flickering like bad video. "What you call quantum phase shifting. Their sensors will detect nothing because technically I am not entirely here." Studied the team as they prepared for departure. 8 beings from 7 different species, all working together with a coordination that spoke of months of training. It should have been chaos. Instead, it was the most professional operation he'd seen since the war. "How do you coordinate all this?" he asked as they strapped into their acceleration couches. "Same way you did on Titan Station," replied. "Good people, clear objectives, and the willingness to die for something bigger than yourself." He paused. "Plus, and Grizzly have been teaching us Sasquatch combat sign language. Turns out when you can't make noise, hand signals become pretty important." The ship lifted off from Haven Station without any sensation of movement. The living hull absorbed vibration as well as scanner beams, watched through the viewports as they passed through the defensive perimeter, nodding weapon emplacements that looked like they'd been grown from the asteroids themselves. "How many ships does the Liberation Fleet have?" he asked. "About 300, replied. "Though most of them aren't what you'd call conventional warships. The Sasquatch prefer boarding actions. They'd rather capture ships than destroy them. The Forest Collective builds ships that can repair themselves. The Stone People make vessels that can ram through practically anything. And the deep ocean folks, submarines that work in space," called from her engineering station. "Don't ask me how, their physics are different from ours." The journey to the prison facility took 18 hours at faster-than-light speed. During the trip, studied intelligence reports that made his blood boil. The facility wasn't just a prison. It was a research center where they were conducting experiments on human prisoners. "They're trying to figure out what makes humans so effective in combat," explained. "Why we're so much harder to conquer than most species. They've been running psychological tests, physical examinations, even brain scans." Bastards muttered. "It gets worse," said quietly. "According to the data Echo gathered from their computer systems, they're not just studying our military capabilities. They're trying to create enhanced soldiers based on human psychological profiles. They want to build who think like humans," continued. "Who can adapt and improvise the way we do. Imagine soldiers with human tactical flexibility but alien technology." "Thought about that for a moment. That would be terrifying," Pine finished. "Which is why we must stop this facility before their research is complete." The prison complex was even more heavily defended than the intelligence reports had suggested. It hung in the shadow of a dead planet, a massive structure that looked like someone had welded together a dozen space stations into one sprawling fortress. Patrol ships moved in constant circuits around the perimeter, and energy shields flickered like soap bubbles around the main structure. 73 patrol vessels, reported from the sensor station. 12 weapon platforms, energy shields at full power. This is going to be tricky. "Good thing we're not going through the front door," said. He activated the ship's communication system and spoke in what sounded like a combination of grunts, clicks, and whistles. Raised an eyebrow, Sasquatch. Dolphin replied. "The deep ocean folks have been shadowing us for the last 6 hours. 3 of their ships running silent in the thermal wake of that gas giant." "I thought you said they built submarines." "I said they built submarines that work in space. I never said they were big," grinned. "Each of those ships is about the size of a shuttle, but they can punch a hole through a battleship's hull like it was paper." The attack began with something had never seen before, a coordinated assault by beings who had been planning this kind of operation for generations. The deep ocean ships attacked the patrol vessels, moving like sharks through the void. Their weapons didn't fire energy beams or missiles. Instead, they launched something that looked like metallic fish that swam through space and burrowed into enemy hulls before exploding from the inside. While they scrambled to respond to the attack, Grizzly brought their ship in close to the prison facility, using its stealth systems to remain invisible. Echo phased through the outer hull and began disabling security systems from the inside. "I am in their computer core," Echo's voice whispered through the ship's speakers. "Their internal sensors are now showing empty corridors. You have perhaps 20 minutes before they realize something is wrong." Felt the familiar pre-combat calm settling over him as they approached the facility's docking bay. This was the part he understood: close quarters combat in a hostile environment with limited time and too many variables. "Remember," said as they prepared to disembark, "we're here for our people first, intelligence second. If we have to choose between saving lives and gathering data, we save lives." "What about the research?" asked. Flint's rock-like features shifted into what might have been a smile. "I will ensure their computers have a very bad day," he rumbled. They moved through the facility like ghosts. Pine's camouflage ability made him effectively invisible, while Echo scouted ahead through walls and security barriers. And Grizzly moved with surprising stealth for creatures their size, and when they did encounter guards, the encounters ended quickly and quietly. The prison levels were worse than had imagined. Humans in cells that were too small, too cold, and filled with monitoring equipment that tracked everything from heart rate to brain wave patterns. Many of the prisoners were barely conscious, kept sedated while machines ran constant tests. "Jesus," whispered as they found the first block of cells. "There must be 200 people here." "More," Pine said, his barkskin shifting colors as he scanned the corridor ahead. "I count 5 levels of cells, perhaps 300 prisoners total." Felt the rage building in his chest again, but he forced it down. Rage was useful, but control was essential. "Can we get them all?" "Not through conventional extraction," replied. "But we don't have to. Echo, how are you doing with their computer systems?" "All security doors can be opened simultaneously," Echo's voice replied from everywhere and nowhere. "Their communications are disabled. Emergency systems are under my control. And I have found their main power generators," Flint added. "When I am finished with them, this facility will have no power, no life support, and no structural integrity." Began to understand the plan. "You're going to destroy the entire station." "Not destroy," corrected. "Liberate. The deep ocean folks have transport ships waiting at safe distance. When we broadcast the evacuation signal, they'll move in and extract every human on this station." "What about the—" His expression went cold. "They can use the escape pods if they're fast enough." They found Sarah Park, Jim Wolfe, and Maria Santos in the high-security section, kept in cells designed for the most dangerous prisoners. All 3 were unconscious, hooked to machines that had been monitoring their vital signs for years. His hands shook as he checked Sarah's pulse. She was alive, but barely. Her hair had gone completely white and she'd lost at least 30 pounds, but she was alive. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Is that really you?" "It's me, Sarah. We're getting you out of here." Her eyes focused on him with difficulty. "The others? There are others. Scientists, engineers, they've been taking people for years." "We know, we're getting everyone," helped her sit up, nodding the way she favored her left side. "What did they do to you?" "Tests," she said bitterly. "Endless tests, trying to figure out how human minds work under stress, how we make decisions in combat. They want to create artificial humans, soldiers with human psychology." Jim Wolfe was conscious but couldn't walk. 3 years of imprisonment had left his muscles atrophied. Maria Santos was the worst. The machines showed she was alive, but she hadn't opened her eyes in 6 months. "We'll get them to medical facilities," said grimly. "The Forest Collective has healers who specialize in treating trauma." They were loading the last of the high-value prisoners onto anti-stretchers when Echo's voice crackled through their communications. "Warning, reinforcements approaching. A full battle squadron, 12 ships. They will arrive in 15 minutes. "Time to go," said. But as they moved toward the extraction point, alarms began blaring throughout the station. "What's happening?" demanded. Was monitoring her portable scanner. "The automated systems are trying to restart. Echo, I thought you had control of their computers." "I do," Echo replied, his voice strained. "But they have a quantum-encrypted backup system I cannot access. Someone is manually overriding my commands." Through the corridor's viewports, could see patrol ships changing course, abandoning their battles with the deep ocean vessels to return to the station. "They're sealing the facility," said as blast doors began dropping throughout the station. They'd rather kill all the prisoners than let us rescue them. Felt something cold and familiar settle in his chest. This was the moment when plans fell apart and training took over. The moment when good people died unless someone made the hard choices. "Get our people to the evacuation point," he told. "I'll buy you time." "No, we stick together." "Someone has to stop them from sealing the station," replied. "And someone has to make sure their backup computer system has a very bad day." He looked at Flint. "Think you can cause enough structural damage to keep those blast doors from closing?" The rock being's features shifted into a fierce grin. "I can make this entire station forget it is supposed to hold together." "Do it, Pine. I need you to get to their backup computer core. Can you do that without being seen?" "I can walk through their security like morning mist through trees." Turned to and Grizzly, "How do you feel about a fighting retreat?" Both Sasquatch made rumbling sounds that needed no translation. Grabbed Sarm, "This is suicide, you'll never make it out." Looked at Sarah Park, unconscious on the stretcher, and thought of Tommy, who would never wake up again. "Maybe," he said, "but they'll remember we were here." The facility shuddered as Flint began his work on the structural supports, and in the distance could hear the sound of blast doors struggling to close against stone that had forgotten how to be solid. The facility came apart like a house of cards in an earthquake. Flint had done his work well. What had been solid walls became flowing liquid. Support beams that had held the station together for decades suddenly remembered they were made of individual atoms and decided to drift apart. Blast doors that should have sealed the prison levels instead crumpled like paper, their molecular bonds disrupted by a stone being who understood matter on a level that physics. Moved through the chaos with and Grizzly flanking him, their massive forms somehow graceful as they navigated debris fields that had been corridors moments before. Behind them, Pine's camouflaged form slipped through security checkpoints that no longer existed, heading for the backup computer core. "Status report," called into his communicator as they reached a junction where three corridors met in a tangle of twisted metal. "Evacuation proceeding," his voice crackled through the static. "The deep ocean ships are moving in now, but those reinforcements are 4 minutes out." "Pine, how are you doing?" "Almost to the computer core," came the reply, Pine's voice calm as rustling leaves despite the station falling apart around him. "I can see it through the wall. They have 6 guards posted." "Can you handle 6 guards?" "I do not need to handle them," Pine replied. "I just need to reach the computer." Understood. Pine could walk through walls, literally becoming one with any plant-based material. And according to the station schematics, the computer core was housed in a chamber lined with bioorganic fiber optic cables, living wood that had been engineered to conduct data instead of nutrients. A patrol rounded the corner ahead of them, 4 soldiers in full combat armor carrying plasma rifles. They saw and raised their weapons. Was faster. The massive Sasquatch crossed 30 feet of corridor in 2 bounds, moving with the deceptive speed of a grizzly bear. His first swipe sent 2 soldiers flying into the wall hard enough to leave dents in the metal. His second caught the 3rd soldier's plasma rifle and crushed it to scrap. The 4th soldier got off 1 shot before Grizzly's huge hand closed around his helmet and squeezed. The plasma beam went wide, leaving a molten scar across the ceiling. "Clear," Grizzly rumbled, tossing the unconscious soldier aside. They kept moving deeper into the station. Emergency lights flickered and died as Flint's molecular disruption spread through the power systems. In the distance, could hear the sound of metal screaming as structural supports failed. "Computer core reached," Pine reported, "beginning infiltration of backup systems." Checked his tactical display, and the rescue team were 3 levels down, moving the rescued prisoners toward the extraction point. The deep ocean ships were close enough to begin emergency transport, but they'd need another few minutes to position themselves properly. Time they didn't have. "Warning," Echo's voice whispered through the communicators. "Battle squadron entering weapons range. They are charging their main batteries." Of course they were. If they couldn't keep their secrets, they'd rather destroy them along with everyone inside. "How long until they fire?" asked. 2 minutes, Echo replied. "Their weapons are designed to vaporize the entire station." Felt the familiar calm of desperate situations settling over him. 2 minutes to get 300 prisoners off a collapsing space station while under attack by a battle squadron. He'd faced worse odds before. Actually, no, he'd never faced worse odds than this. Pine, I need those backup systems down now. Working, Pine replied, strain evident in his voice. Their encryption is more complex than expected. Give me 30 seconds. A new voice crackled through the communicators, Sarah Park, weak but determined. This is Sarah. I'm awake and I remember the station layout. There's another way to stop them. Talk to me. The station's main reactor has a manual override. Physical controls, no computer interface. If someone can get to the reactor core and trigger an emergency shutdown, it will disable all their systems, including weapons and communications. Studied the schematic on his display. The reactor core was at the center of the station, protected by multiple security barriers and currently guarded by what looked like an entire platoon of soldiers. That's suicide, Sarah. The radiation alone would kill anyone who gets close to those manual controls. Not anyone, Grizzly rumbled. Sasquatch physiology is highly resistant to radiation. I could survive long enough to trigger the shutdown. Absolutely not, replied. I'm not sending you on a suicide mission. Made a series of grunts and gestures, and Grizzly translated. He says the forest people have a saying, the tree that dies to save the grove is remembered in every ring of growth that follows. He volunteers to go with me. No, we find another way. There is no other way, Pine's voice cut through their argument. I have accessed their backup systems. They are not just planning to destroy this station. They are planning to destroy Haven Station as well. They have located our base. Felt ice in his veins? How? A tracking beacon in one of the prisoners we rescued. It was hidden in a medical implant, undetectable until activated. They have been waiting for us to lead them to our allies. The implications hit like a physical blow. Every species in the Liberation Fleet, every rebel base, every hope for human freedom, all of it compromised because they'd walked into a trap. How long until they attack Haven Station? He asked. The beacon transmitted coordinates 6 minutes ago, Pine replied. At maximum speed, a fleet could reach Haven Station in 4 hours. 4 hours to warn Director and the Liberation Fleet. 4 hours to evacuate thousands of beings from the one safe haven they'd managed to build. Unless the Never got the chance to send that fleet. Looked at and Grizzly, both of whom were watching him with expressions that somehow managed to be both resigned and hopeful. If you shut down the reactor, he said slowly, what happens to the battle squadron? Their ships are powered by the same quantum resonance frequency as this station, Pine replied. When the reactor fails, it will create a cascade failure in their power systems. They will be dead in space. Long enough for the Liberation Fleet to get here. Long enough for the Liberation Fleet to capture them, Grizzly confirmed. Technology is valuable. Our engineers would very much like to study it. Closed his eyes and thought of Tommy, of all the human children who would grow up as slaves if the resettlement plan succeeded. He thought of Sarah Park and the others who had survived 3 years of torture just to make it to this moment. Some choices weren't really choices at all. Do it, he said, but I'm going with you. No's voice crackled through the communicator. We need you alive. The Liberation Fleet needs leadership. The Liberation Fleet needs to know that humans don't abandon their people, interrupted. And they need to see that we're willing to die for what we believe in. He switched to the general frequency. All teams, this is Admiral. We have a new mission priority. Pine, can you shut down the station's internal defenses from the backup computer core? Already done, Pine replied. All automated weapons are offline. Good, get our people to the extraction point and signal the deep ocean ships for emergency transport. Tell them to get clear as soon as the last prisoner is aboard. What about you? Was already moving toward the reactor core with and Grizzly flanking him. We're going to make sure they remember this day. The journey to the reactor core took them through the heart of the dying station. Emergency bulkheads had sealed off entire sections, but Flint's molecular disruption was still spreading. Walls that had been solid minutes ago now flowed like water. Support beams twisted into impossible shapes before collapsing entirely. They encountered 2 more patrols on the way. The first never knew what hit them, and Grizzly moved through the aliens like a force of nature, all claws and crushing strength and prehistoric fury. The second patrol was smarter, taking cover behind improvised barricades and calling for reinforcements. It didn't help them. Had forgotten how effective the Sasquatch were in close-quarters combat. They didn't just fight, they dominated. Every movement was precise, every attack calculated to cause maximum damage with minimum effort. They fought like they'd been doing it for thousands of years. Which realized they probably had. "Reactor core in sight," he reported as they reached the final checkpoint. Through the reinforced windows, he could see the pulsing heart of the station, a quantum reactor that generated enough energy to power a small city. He could also see the 40 soldiers positioned between them and the manual controls. "That's a lot of guards," he observed. Made a sound that might have been laughter. Grizzly's response needed no translation. "They say 40 is a good start," Pine's voice came through the communicator. "But you should know, I have finished with the backup computer systems. All blast doors are now open, all security systems are disabled, and I have broadcast the evacuation signal on all frequencies. Which means every prisoner on this station now knows exactly where the exits are located, and every one of them is angry about what they did to them." Through the walls, could hear the sound of running feet, shouting voices, and what might have been a prison riot spreading through the entire facility. "Also," Pine added, "I took the liberty of opening the armory. Our people are no longer unarmed." Grinned, sometimes the best strategies were the simplest ones. The reactor core's security doors exploded inward 30 seconds later, as Flint arrived with a small army of liberated prisoners. Humans who had spent years in captivity fell on their guards with a fury that was almost frightening to witness. The battle for the reactor core lasted exactly 90 seconds. "Manual controls located," Grizzly reported, standing before a panel that looked like it had been designed for beings with 4 arms and no understanding of ergonomics. "Reactor shutdown in progress." Felt the station's vibrations changing as the massive quantum reactor began to power down. Through the viewports, he could see the battle squadron's ships suddenly going dark as their power systems failed. "That's it," he said into his communicator. "All ships dead in space. Liberation Fleet, this is Admiral, the way is clear." Director's voice came back immediately. "Copy that, Admiral. Fleet is inbound, estimated arrival in 20 minutes. Outstanding work." "What's the status on prisoner evacuation?" "Complete," reported. "All 300 prisoners are aboard the transport ships and clear of the facility, including your friends from Titan Station." Felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years, actual hope. "Time to go," he told in Grizzly. "Our work here is done." But as they turned to leave the reactor chamber, Echo's voice whispered through the communicators with something like panic. "Warning, new contacts approaching. Not Liberation Fleet. Unknown configuration, massive energy signatures, they are." The transmission cut to static. Through the viewport, could see ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the star system. Ships that dwarfed anything he'd ever seen, moving in formations that spoke of military discipline and overwhelming firepower. "Who the hell is that?" he wondered aloud. Grizzly made a low rumbling sound that somehow conveyed both satisfaction and anticipation. "He says they are the ones the Forest Collective calls the Old Hunters," Pine's voice translated from somewhere else in the station. "They have been watching this sector for a very long time, waiting to see if the younger species were worth saving." Stared at the approaching fleet, trying to count ships that seemed to bend space around them. "Apparently," Pine continued, "what we just did here has answered their question. Old Hunter ships were beautiful and terrifying in equal measure." Watched from the observation deck of the Liberation Fleet's flagship as vessels that seemed to be carved from crystallized starlight moved through space with impossible grace. Each ship was unique, clearly grown rather than built, and they ranged in size from destroyer-class vessels that could have swallowed Earth's old battleships to a massive command ship that was easily 20 kilometers long. "They call themselves the Eternal Gardeners," Director explained as she joined at the viewing port. "According to the Forest Collective's oldest memories, they've been watching this galaxy for millions of years, tending it like a garden." "Tending it how?" asked. "By letting younger species grow and develop naturally until they either prove themselves worthy of advancement or destroy themselves through stupidity. His expression was grim. Apparently, the Galactic Council has been failing their tests for the last 1,000 years. On the tactical display, could see the positions of all the ships in the area. The Liberation Fleet's 300 vessels looked like toys compared to the old hunter ships. The captured battle squadron, powerless and drifting, seemed almost pathetic in comparison. And somewhere in the middle of it all, the ruins of the prison facility continued to break apart, its secrets finally exposed to the galaxy. "What do they want?" asked. "To talk," replied a new voice, and turned to see the strangest being he'd encountered yet. The old hunter representative stood nearly 7 feet tall, but its form seemed to shift constantly, as if it existed in multiple dimensions at once. Sometimes it looked almost human, other times like a tree made of light, and occasionally like something that might have been a cross between a dolphin and a butterfly. Its voice, when it spoke, sounded like harmonized music. "Admiral," the being said, and somehow knew it was speaking directly to him. "I am called Symphonic Convergence in your language, though that is a poor translation. We have been watching your species with great interest." Found his voice. "How long have you been watching?" "Since your ancestors first looked up at the stars and wondered what lay beyond their small world. We have observed your development, your wars, your growth. Most young species destroy themselves within a few thousand years of achieving. You have surprised us." "Surprised how?" Symphonic Convergence's form shifted to something more recognizably humanoid, though still translucent and shimmering. "You adapt. You survive. You refuse to surrender even when surrender is the logical choice. And most remarkably, you form alliances with other species based on shared values rather than shared biology." Through the viewport, could see rescue ships moving between the old hunter vessels and the Liberation Fleet. The Forest Collective's living ships were docking with crystalline old hunter vessels, and somehow the two completely different technologies were compatible. "The Galactic Council believes in order through submission," Symphonic Convergence continued. "They believe in order through domination, but your species and your new allies believe in order through cooperation. This is unusual." "Is that good or bad?" asked. "It is evolutionary," the old hunter replied. "And evolution is always good even when it is painful." Director stepped forward. "What does this mean for the Liberation Fleet, for Earth?" "It means the galaxy is about to change in ways that will make the last war look like a minor disagreement." Symphonic Convergence gestured, and the tactical display expanded to show the entire local galactic arm. "They are not the only species that has been pushing for more aggressive expansion. The Galactic Council has been growing more authoritarian with each passing year. They have forgotten that their authority comes from the consent of their member species." Red markers appeared on the display, showing military positions throughout the sector. There were hundreds of them. "The government received word of your attack 6 hours ago," Symphonic Convergence explained. "They are mobilizing their entire military for what they call a final solution to the human problem. They plan to sterilize every world in the Sol system and use it as an example to other species that might consider rebellion." Felt cold dread settling in his stomach. "How long do we have?" "Their main battle fleet will arrive at Earth in 72 hours. 800 ships, including their flagship dreadnoughts. It is the largest military force assembled since the formation of the Galactic Council." "We can't fight 800 ships," said quietly. "The Liberation Fleet is brave, but we're not suicide pilots." "No," Symphonic Convergence agreed. "You cannot fight 800 ships, but you are not alone." The display changed again and saw something that made his heart race. Green markers were appearing throughout the galaxy, dozens at first, then hundreds, then thousands. "Every species the Council has ignored or oppressed over the last millennium has been waiting for someone to make the first move," Symphonic Convergence explained. "Your rescue of the prisoners has become a symbol. The story is spreading faster than light itself, carried by species the Council doesn't even know exist." "How many ships?" asked. "Approximately 12,000, representing 47 different species. Some are refugees who have been hiding for generations. Others are advanced civilizations that from galactic politics centuries ago. All of them remember what it was like to be free." Director stared at the display. "This isn't just a rebellion anymore. This is a revolution." "Yes," Symphonic Convergence replied. And revolutions require leaders who understand both strategy and sacrifice, which brings us to why we wanted to speak with you specifically, Admiral. Had a sinking feeling he knew where this was going. What do you need? The Liberation Fleet will need to split into multiple task forces, Symphonic Convergence explained. Some will defend Earth directly, others will strike at supply lines and communication hubs. But the most important mission will be to reach the Galactic Council itself and present them with evidence of war crimes. Evidence like the prison facility. Evidence like the 300 human prisoners you rescued, along with detailed records of illegal experimentation and the planned genocide of an entire species. Evidence that proves they have been operating outside Council authority for years. Understood, you want us to turn the Council against the... We want you to give the Council a choice, Symphonic Convergence corrected. They can either reign in thee and face a controlled transition to a more democratic government, or they can support thee and face a galaxy-wide war that will destroy everything they've built. And if they choose war... Symphonic Convergence's form shifted to something that might have been a smile. Then we will remind them why elder species are called elder. We have been gardening this galaxy for a very long time, Admiral. We know how to prune the branches that have grown too wild. Through the viewport, could see more ships arriving, vessels from species he'd never heard of, all joining the growing Liberation Fleet. The space around the destroyed prison facility was becoming crowded with the largest gathering of free ships in galactic history. There's something else, Director said. Something the Admiral needs to know before he makes this decision. Symphonic Convergence nodded. The mission to the Galactic Council capital will be extremely dangerous. They have infiltrated Council security at every level. Any ship carrying evidence of their crimes will be targeted for destruction. How dangerous? Asked. Of the 3 possible routes to the Council capital, 2 pass through controlled space. The third passes through a region of space that most species consider impassable. What's in that region? Quantum storms, gravitational anomalies, and at least one stellar phenomenon that our science cannot fully explain, Symphonic Convergence replied. It is called the Graveyard of Dreams because so many expeditions have been lost there. Looked at the tactical display again, noting the positions of all the Allied fleets. 12,000 ships sounded like a lot, but the galaxy was a big place. They'd need every advantage they could get. I'll take the mission, he said. No, protested. You're needed here. The Liberation Fleet needs experienced leadership. The Liberation Fleet has experienced leadership, interrupted, looking at. You've been planning this longer than I have. You know these people, these species, they trust you. He turned back to Symphonic Convergence. But you're right about one thing. Someone needs to get that evidence to the Council, someone who understands what the stakes are. The mission will require a small, fast ship, Symphonic Convergence explained. Large enough to carry the evidence and witnesses, small enough to avoid detection. We estimate a crew of 6 to 8 beings would be optimal. I know exactly the crew I want, said, thinking of Pine and the others who had already proven they could work together under impossible circumstances. There is one more thing, Symphonic Convergence said. The route through the Graveyard of Dreams will require a navigator who understands quantum spacetime, someone who can guide the ship through anomalies that would destroy conventional vessels. Do you have someone in mind? We do. Symphonic Convergence gestured toward the viewport and saw Echo materializing from the shadows. His species evolved in a region where normal physics don't apply. He is uniquely qualified for this mission. Echo's shadowy form flickered as he spoke. I have been studying the Graveyard of Dreams for many years. It is dangerous but not impossible. The key is understanding that space and time are more flexible than most species believe. Felt the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders. Another impossible mission with volunteers who were probably going to die for a cause that might not even work. It was exactly the kind of mission humans specialized in. When do we leave? He asked. Within the hour, Symphonic Convergence replied. The fleet is moving faster than anticipated, and Admiral. Yes. Symphonic Convergence's form shifted one final time, becoming something that looked almost exactly like a human, an older man with kind eyes and a sad smile. Your son would be proud of what you're doing, it said. The Forest Collective has been singing his name in their memory songs. In their tradition, he has become one of the eternal children, remembered forever in the stories of those who fight for justice. Felt tears on his cheeks and didn't try to wipe them away. "Thank you," he whispered. As they prepared for departure, stood once more at the viewport, looking out at the impossible fleet that had gathered in response to one man's grief and one boy's memory. Somewhere in that collection of ships were Sarah Park, Jim Wolfe, and Maria Santos, getting the medical care they desperately needed. Somewhere else were 300 other humans who had been given back their freedom. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, a fleet was coming to destroy everything humanity had built. Thought of Tommy one last time, remembering the boy's excitement about meeting real aliens, his dreams of exploring the galaxy, his absolute faith that the good guys always won in the end. Maybe they did. Maybe it just took longer than anyone expected. The ship that would carry them through the graveyard of dreams was waiting in the docking bay, a hybrid vessel built from human engineering, Sasquatch biotechnology, and old hunter quantum mechanics. It looked like nothing that should be able to fly, let alone survive the most dangerous region of space in the known galaxy. It was perfect. As they lifted off from the Liberation fleet, could see the first elements of the Allied forces spreading out across the star system, preparing for the battles to come. Earth was still 70 hours away from the attack, but the war for freedom had already begun. And for the first time since Tommy died, believed they might actually win. The galaxy was about to learn that humans weren't just hard to conquer. They were impossible to break. The liberation of the prison facility had been just the beginning. The real war was about to start. And humanity had just gained allies that made the Galactic Council look like children playing with toys. It was time to remind the galaxy why humans were so hard to kill. In the darkness beyond the station, the Liberation fleet waited, and the galaxy prepared for humanity to remember why it had taken so long to conquer in the first place. It was time to remind the galaxy why humans had been worth conquering in the first place.